Sexual assault in the military has long been swept under the rug, covered up for rationalized acts of hazing or bullying. But now we're learning more about the men who were victimized during their time serving the country. Pentagon statistics show an average of 10,000 men each year are sexually assaulted in the U.S. military. Most of the victims are usually younger, lower-ranking males who struggle to report the incidents. Well, in a new New York Times report, 6 men are breaking their silence, sharing their stories of sexual assault in the military. David Phillips is the author of the article, and he joins me now. He's a national correspondent for the New York Times. So, David, you spoke with 6 men whose service spanned over several decades. What did you learn about the severity and the scope of this problem?
You know, it was something that happened again and again, and oftentimes the military didn't know how to respond, and so often they would blame the victim, or they would often kick victims out for some other misconduct, and because of that, it became a hidden issue that commanders never knew about.
How are the victims doing now? What did they tell you?
You know, a lot of people were thrown out of the military and had their entire identity taken away. So whatever trauma they were going through just from being assaulted was compounded because they were fired. They were sent home, often under a cloud of shame. And this oftentimes happened, you know, when people were 19, 20 years old, right when they're trying to form their identity, and it really sent them sprawling. So, you know, men that I spoke to who were assaulted in the 1960s and 70s, they spent decades trying to hide this, even oftentimes from themselves. And the damage to their lives was tremendous.
You know, you're talking about decades of this has spanned over. How were these men treated when they decided to speak out? And is there any different lens that folks in the military are looking at this from at this point? Because we are in a very different era than we were 40 years ago.
Oh my gosh, so the military, right, the military now, it's night and day. There are so many more resources for people who are assaulted. There are victims advocates. There are better rules protecting them if they do file a report. What's interesting, though, is that there's still this stigma and silence, so that 4 out of 5 male victims never come forward. They never file a report. So even though there are more resources, there's still a lot of people who are not getting any help.
What has the military done with all these allegations coming forward? Are they trying to set the record straight? Is there an environment that's conducive to allowing folks to come forward and be heard?
You know, it's funny, the military is such a forward-looking institution that even 5 years ago is considered ancient history. So if you have people who are coming forward who are saying, hey, I was assaulted 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they sort of shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's not our problem. But what you can see is that more and more victims are going to the Veterans Affairs Department and saying, I need help, I should be compensated. In fact, the number has increased something like 70% each year for the last 10 years. And now there's something like 60 or 70,000 who are recognized as victims of military sexual trauma.
It's so hard to hear and to read this kind of reporting, but to hear that statistic, I think, could potentially give people hope who are struggling with this. David Phillips, I want to thank you very much for your reporting and for joining us.
Sure, happy to do it.